I am Benedict Ross, but you can call me Ben. I spent 40 years as a lead engineer at Boeing building machines that defy gravity thinking. I had built a solid foundation for my family. But while I lay in a sterile hospital bed in Seattle, with my chest literally stapled shut from open heart surgery, my entire world was being dismantled. I woke up not to the sound of my twin sons praying for my recovery, but to the sound of them celebrating a wire transfer. They had used a medical power of attorney to sell my home behind my back while I was unconscious on the operating table. 70 years of life, 40 years of marriage, and 32 years of raising children were erased in 48 hours for a quick cash grab. Before I tell you how I rose from that hospital bed to teach my ungrateful sons a lesson that would cost them everything they held dear, please take a moment to hit that like button. If you believe that loyalty should mean something in a family, subscribe to the channel. And I want to know where you are listening from today, so drop your city in the comments below. It brings me comfort to know I am not shouting into the void. The first thing I noticed was the rhythm, beep, beep, beep. The electronic pulse of the cardiac monitor was the only proof that I was still alive. My body felt heavy like it was made of lead, and there was a deep, searing fire in the center of my chest, where the surgeons had sawed through my sternum to repair my failing heart. I tried to take a deep breath, but the pain was immediate and sharp, a reminder of the triple bypass that was supposed to give me more time with my family. My throat felt like sandpaper dry and scratchy from the breathing tube they must have just removed. I kept my eyes closed, fighting the grogginess of the anesthesia. I wanted to drift back into the dark, but then I heard voices. They were familiar voices, voices I had listened to since they were babbling infants. My twin sons, Mason and Tyler, were standing at the foot of my bed. "I told you it would clear by noon." Tyler whispered, his voice vibrating with a nervous energy I knew all too well. The escrow officer confirmed the wire. $850,000. It is sitting in the joint account right now. I felt a jolt of confusion that had nothing to do with the drugs. $850,000. That number was specific. That was the exact appraisal value of my house in Queen Anne, the Victorian home with the wrap-around porch that looked out over the Puget Sound. Mason let out a low sigh, a sound of arrogant relief. Finally, he said, "That covers the margin call on your crypto disaster and gives me enough to pay off the balloon payment on the rental properties. We did it. We actually pulled it off before the old man woke up." My heart rate must have spiked because the machine beeped a little faster. I tried to process what I was hearing. They sold the house. My house. The house where I had carried their mother across the threshold in 1984. The house where I had spent weekends sanding the original oak floors until my hands blistered, while Martha, my late wife, planted hydrangeas in the front garden. That house was not just an asset. It was a museum of our lives. It was the only place where I could still smell Martha's perfume on the rainy days. "Don't call him the old man," Tyler snapped, though he kept his voice low. "It feels wrong. And what if he wakes up and asks about the house?" "What do we tell him?" Mason scoffed, and I could practically hear the eye roll in his tone. "We tell him nothing. Not yet. We tell him there were complications with the surgery, and he needs to rest. By the time he is lucid enough to ask to go home, we will have him moved to that facility in Yakima." Yakima. That was a 2-hour drive away into the high desert, far from my friends, far from my doctors, and far from the grave where Martha was buried. They were not just selling my home, they were exiling me. They were discarding me like a used part from an outdated engine. I felt a tear leak from the corner of my eye, hot and stinging. I wanted to sit up and roar. I wanted to grab Mason by the collar of his expensive designer shirt and demand to know how he could do this. Mason, the son I had paid for through law school only for him to drop out and become a real estate shark. And Tyler, the dreamer, who I had bailed out of debt more times than I could count. I had signed that power of attorney just 3 days ago, sitting at my kitchen table. I remembered the scene vividly. Mason had placed his hand on my shoulder, his face a mask of concern. "Dad," he had said, "you need to focus on the surgery. Let us handle the bills and the insurance. Just sign this so we can make medical decisions if you are under for too long. We just want to protect you. Protect me." The word tasted like bile in my mouth. They had weaponized my trust. They had waited for the anesthesia to take hold, to execute a plan that must have been in the works for months. You do not sell a historic home in Seattle in 48 hours unless you have a buyer lined up and the paperwork ready to go. They had been planning this while I was getting my pre-op blood work done. Tyler spoke again, his voice whining. "I still feel bad about the stuff in the attic, Mason. Mom's old piano, Dad's model planes. The buyers said they were going to gut the place. It is all going to the dumpster." "Let it go," Tyler, Mason hissed. "We are talking about nearly $1 million cash. Do you want to be homeless, or do you want to be sentimental?" The old man is 70. He does not need a 4-bedroom house. He needs a bed and a nurse. We are doing him a favor. We are simplifying his life. Simplifying my life. Is that what they called it, stripping a man of his dignity and his history? I remembered the last time I saw Martha in that house. She was sitting in the bay window watching the rain fall over the city. She made me promise that I would never let the house go to strangers. She wanted it to be a legacy for the boys. She thought it would be a place for grandchildren to run through the halls. She never imagined that the boys she nursed and coddled would sell her sanctuary to pay for gambling debts and bad investments. I summoned every ounce of strength I had. I needed to see them. I needed them to look me in the eyes. I forced my eyelids open. The harsh fluorescent light of the recovery room blinded me for a second before their faces came into focus. They were dressed in suits looking like successful men, but to me they looked like vultures in expensive plumage. They froze when they saw me looking at them. For a split second I saw the panic in Tyler's eyes. He looked like the kid who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But Mason was faster. He smoothed his expression instantly, putting on that fake smile he used on his clients. Dad, Mason said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "You are awake." Thank God. We were so worried. I tried to speak, but my voice was a broken croak. "Water." Tyler rushed to grab a cup with a straw and held it to my lips. I drank greedily the cool liquid, soothing the fire in my throat. I pulled away and looked at Mason. I saw the greed lingering in his eyes, the calculation. He was wondering how much I had heard. "How do you feel, Dad?" Tyler asked, his hand trembling slightly as he set the cup down. I whispered, pausing to gather my breath. "I feel like I have been robbed." The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor, picking up the pace of my racing heart. Mason stiffened. He exchanged a quick glance with Tyler. "You are confused, Dad," Mason said quickly, a little too quickly. "It is the medication. The doctor said you might have hallucinations. You just need to rest." I closed my eyes again, not because I was tired, but because I could not bear to look at them. I knew if I pushed it now in my weakened state, they would just sedate me or gaslight me further. I needed to be smart. I was an engineer. I solved problems. And this was the biggest problem I had ever faced. My sons had declared war on me. They thought I was a helpless old man, a resource to be liquidated. They thought they had won. But as I lay there listening to the hum of the machines keeping me alive, I made a vow to myself and to the spirit of my wife. I would not go to Yakima. I would not let them spend a single dime of that money in peace. They had started this conflict with a lie, but I would finish it with the truth. I waited until I heard their footsteps leave the room. I waited until I was sure I was alone. Then I turned my head to look at the side table where my personal belongings were bagged up. My phone was there. I did not reach for it yet. I needed a plan. I realized then that the surgery had fixed my heart, but my sons had broken it all over again. However, they forgot one thing about Benedict Ross. I built things to withstand pressure, and I was about to show them that their father was not just a source of funds, but a force of nature. This was only the beginning. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the mechanical hum of the equipment that had recently kept me alive. I looked at Mason, my firstborn, the child I had held in my arms, before I even knew what it meant to be a father. He stood at the foot of my bed, adjusting his cufflinks, his face a mask of practiced concern that did not quite reach his eyes. I had just accused him of selling my home, the sanctuary of my life, while I was unconscious. Any normal son would be on his knees begging for forgiveness or weeping with guilt. But Mason was not a normal son. He was a businessman, and I was just another transaction that needed to be closed. Mason reached into his leather briefcase, the expensive Italian leather creaking softly in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick folder and tossed it onto the tray table that swung over my legs. The papers fanned out, revealing rows of numbers and medical jargon. "Dad, you are looking at this all wrong," Mason said, his voice smooth and steady, the kind of tone he used when trying to close a difficult deal on a property that had a cracked foundation. We didn't want to sell the house. We had to. Look at these. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the physical trauma of having my chest cracked open. I reached out and picked up the top sheet. It was an invoice from the hospital billing department stamped with urgent red ink. The total at the bottom was staggering. $250,000 for the operating room alone. Another $100,000 for anesthesia complications. There were complications during the surgery. Dad Mason continued leaning in as if sharing a confidential secret. The insurance company denied the claim. They said it was a pre-existing condition that wasn't disclosed properly. They threatened to stop the procedure halfway through unless we showed proof of funds. We had to make a choice. The house or your life. We chose you. I looked at the paper closely. I spent 40 years at Boeing analyzing schematics and technical documents. I knew how to spot a fabrication. The font on the invoice header was slightly off, a pixelated imitation of the hospital's official logo. The billing codes were generic, the kind you could find with a simple Google search. And the date on the invoice was from yesterday, hours after the surgery had already been completed. "This is a lie, Mason," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but hard as steel. "Insurance doesn't stop a bypass surgery halfway through. That is not how it works. And this invoice, the kerning on the font is wrong. You forged this." Mason didn't flinch. He just sighed, a sound of deep disappointment, as if I were a senile old man who couldn't grasp reality. "Dad, the toxins from the anesthesia are making you paranoid. Tyler and I spent all night on the phone with the billing department. We are trying to save you from bankruptcy. We are trying to buy you time." I looked over at Tyler. Unlike Mason, Tyler was not a good liar. He was standing by the window, nervously tapping his foot. He was looking everywhere except at me. He was wearing a casual hoodie, trying to look like the concerned younger brother, but as he raised his hand to scratch the back of his neck, his sleeve rode up. That was when I saw it. Glinting under the harsh hospital lights was a Rolex Submariner. The stainless steel band was pristine, the ceramic bezel shining with that distinct luster of brand-new wealth. It was the blue dial version, the one I knew cost upwards of $15,000. Tyler had been borrowing gas money from me 2 weeks ago. He had been dodging calls from collection agencies for months. And now, 48 hours after my house was sold, he was wearing a watch that cost more than my first car. "Nice watch, Tyler," I said, pointing a trembling finger at his wrist. "Did the insurance company buy you that too?" Tyler froze. He quickly yanked his sleeve down his face, turning a shade of pale that matched the hospital sheets. "It is a fake, Dad," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Just a knockoff I got online. $20. A knockoff. I knew watches. I knew precision engineering. The sweep of that second hand was perfect. It was no knockoff. It was my living room floor. It was my garden. It was the equity of my life wrapped around his ungrateful wrist. Before I could call him out, the door to the room swung open with a force that made the privacy curtain sway. A wave of overpowering floral perfume assaulted my senses, masking the smell of antiseptic. Megan Mason's wife marched into the room. She was dressed as if she were going to a brunch at the country club, wearing a white blazer that looked dangerously out of place in a recovery ward. "Oh my God, this place smells like rubbing alcohol and depression," Megan announced, not even looking at me. She walked straight to Mason and brushed a piece of invisible lint off his shoulder. "Did you tell him yet? We need to get out of here. The cafeteria coffee is sludge and I have a Pilates class at 4. "Megan, not now." Mason hissed through gritted teeth, tipping his head toward me. Megan turned her gaze to me, and for a moment her face softened into a grotesque parody of sympathy. "Oh, hi, Ben. You look stable. Look, we need to talk about logistics. Staying here is just draining the accounts, and honestly, the care here is subpar. I saw a nurse drop a napkin and just pick it up. Disgusting." She pulled a glossy brochure from her oversized designer handbag and dropped it onto my chest, right over the incision. I winced at the pressure, but she didn't notice. Or she didn't care. Golden Pines Living Center. She read the title out loud as if I couldn't read. "It is in Yakima. It is rustic, quiet, and way more affordable. Mason and I did the math. If we move you there by tomorrow, we can stretch the money from the house for maybe 5 years. It is better for everyone." I looked at the brochure. The photos were grainy, showing a bleak single-story building surrounded by brown grass and a chain-link fence. It looked less like a home and more like a holding facility for the forgotten. Yakima was hours away from everything I knew. It was isolated. It was cheap. And that was exactly the point. "You want to move me to a warehouse in the desert so you can keep the rest of the money," I said, looking from Megan to Mason. "You aren't buying time for me. You are buying lifestyle for yourselves." Megan's smile dropped instantly. Her eyes narrowed, revealing the contempt she had always barely concealed. "Look, Ben, let's be real. You are 70. You just had heart surgery. You aren't going back to mowing lawns and fixing gutters. We are doing you a favor. The house is gone. The money is in our control because you signed the papers. We are the ones making the decisions now. You can go to Golden Pines and be grateful, or you can rot here until the hospital kicks you out for non-payment." I looked at Mason, waiting for him to defend his father, waiting for him to tell his wife that she couldn't speak to me that way. But Mason just looked at the floor, inspecting the shine on his Italian shoes. "It is a good facility," Dad, Mason mumbled. "They have bingo on Tuesdays." Bingo on Tuesdays. That was what my life had been reduced to in their eyes. A game of chance in a cheap room waiting to die so they wouldn't have to pretend to care anymore. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The anger that had been boiling in my chest cooled into something solid and sharp. They thought I was trapped. They thought the invoice, the gaslighting, and the sheer audacity of their betrayal would crush my spirit. They saw an old man hooked up to tubes. They didn't see the engineer who had spent a lifetime solving catastrophic failures. I closed my eyes, feigning exhaustion. I let my head loll back against the pillow. I needed them to think they had won. I needed them to get sloppy. "I am tired," I whispered. "I just want to sleep." Megan let out a loud sigh of relief. Finally. "Okay, we will go sign the transfer papers. We will come get you in the morning for the transport." "Come on, Mason." "Tyler, stop fidgeting with that watch, you look guilty." They turned to leave, their footsteps light and hurried. They were eager to get out of the room, eager to go spend the money they had stolen from my blood and sweat. As the door clicked shut behind them, I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles. I wasn't going to Yakima. I wasn't going to let them win. I reached for the call button, but not for the nurse. I needed Dr. Chen. I needed the only person in this building who didn't look at me and see a dollar sign. My sons had made their move. They had played their hand. But they had forgotten the first rule of engineering. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And my reaction was going to be nuclear. The door pushed open with a soft hydraulic hiss, and for a second the air in the room shifted. My sons, who had been halfway out the door, froze in their tracks. It was Dr. Liu Chen. He did not look like a man who was just doing rounds. He walked with a precision that I recognized from my own days on the engineering floor. He held a metal chart in his hands, and his eyes scanned the room, instantly cataloging the tension, the fake invoice on the bed, and the nervous sweat on Mason's forehead. Mason reacted first. He stepped back into the room, moving quickly to position himself between me and the doctor. It was a subtle move to an outsider, but to me it was a defensive blockade. Mason put on his best salesman smile, the one he used when he was trying to offload a property with a leaking roof. "Dr. Chen, thank you for coming by," Mason said, his voice loud and booming, trying to dominate the space. "My father is actually very tired. We were just leaving to let him rest. He had a bit of an episode with some confusion earlier, so we think it is best if he sleeps it off. We can discuss his charts outside if you have a moment." Mason reached out as if to guide the doctor back into the hallway. He was trying to corral the man, trying to keep the narrative under his control. He wanted to intercept any information before it could reach my ears, but Dr. Chen did not move. He stood his ground, his feet planted firmly on the linoleum. He looked at Mason's hand, hovering near his arm, and then looked up at Mason's face with a cold, professional detachment. "I am not here to speak with you, Mason," the doctor said calmly. "I am here to speak with my patient. And frankly, Mr. Ross does not look confused to me. He looks like a man who is being crowded." I tried to sit up, but the pain in my chest flared hot and sharp. I gritted my teeth and forced a sound out of my throat. "I am not confused," I rasped. "Mason is lying." Mason spun around, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad, stop it. You do not know what you are saying. Dr. Chen, seriously, he thinks the insurance covers everything, but we know the reality. We saw the denial letter. We are just trying to handle it without stressing him out." Mason tried to lean over the bed, reaching for the call button as if to summon a nurse to sedate me. He was physically blocking my view of the doctor, now his broad shoulders creating a wall. That was when Dr. Chen moved. He did not shout. He did not get angry. He simply stepped around Mason with a fluid motion, bypassing the blockade entirely. He walked right up to the side of my bed and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. His touch was grounding. It was an anchor in the storm of gaslighting my son was trying to create. "Mr. Ross, look at me," Dr. Chen said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant only for the two of us. Mason sputtered behind him. "Hey, you cannot just ignore the power of attorney holder. I am telling you to leave." Dr. Chen did not even turn around. He held up a hand, silencing Mason with a single gesture. "Security is right down the hall, Mason. Do not make me call them. This is a post-operative recovery room, not a negotiation table." The threat hung in the air. "Oh." Mason fell silent, though I could hear his heavy breathing. Tyler was shuffling his feet by the door, looking like he wanted to vanish into the drywall. Dr. Chen looked into my eyes. "Mr. Ross, I heard what your son said about the insurance denial. I saw the paper on your bed." He reached down and picked up the forged invoice Mason had left. He glanced at it for barely a second before dropping it back onto the tray with a look of disgust. "This is garbage," Dr. Chen said, calling me by my first name for the first time. "It is a complete fabrication. I checked your file personally before I came in here. You worked for Boeing for 40 years. You have the executive retiree platinum package." I felt my heart skip a beat. I knew my benefits were good, but in the fog of pain and Mason's confident lies, I had started to doubt my own memory. "Your insurance covers 95% of this surgery." Dr. Chen continued, his voice steady and sure. The copay is minimal. We are talking a few $1,000s at most, not hundreds of thousands. There was no denial. There were no complications that the insurance rejected. The surgery was a textbook success. I looked past the doctor at Mason. His face had drained of color. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at the exit. The lie had collapsed. The foundation of their scheme had been built on the assumption that I would be too weak or too senile to question the numbers. But Dr. Chen was not finished. He leaned in closer, and his expression softened from professional authority to personal outrage. "And there is something else you need to know, Ben," he said quietly. I waited, my breath catching in my throat. "On the day of your surgery, I came out to the waiting room to give an update halfway through the procedure," Dr. Chen said. "Usually when I come out to speak to family, they are pacing or praying or holding hands. They are terrified." He paused, and I saw a flash of anger in his dark eyes. "Your sons were not praying, Ben. They were sitting in the corner with a man in a cheap suit, a notary public. I saw the papers on the table. I saw the deed transfer documents. I saw the photographs of your house. I felt as if the floor had opened up beneath my bed. Hearing it from the doctor made it real in a way that my own intuition had not. It was an objective fact. They were signing the closing documents while you were on the bypass machine," Dr. Chen whispered. "I heard them laughing, Ben. I heard Mason say that the timing was perfect because you would be out of it for days. They did not sell your house to save you. They sold it because they thought you would never be strong enough to stop them." The room spun. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. While my heart was stopped and a machine was pumping my blood, my sons were laughing and signing away my life. They were celebrating their inheritance before I was even in the grave. I looked at Mason. He was not the son I raised. He was a stranger, parasite in a suit. "You laughed," I whispered. My voice was weak, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. "You laughed while I was dying." Mason finally spoke, his voice shrill and defensive. "We did not laugh. That is a lie. He is twisting it. We were relieved that we could secure your future. Dad, do not listen to him. He is just a doctor. He does not understand finance." Dr. Chen stood up straight and turned to face Mason. "I understand enough, Mason. I understand that elder abuse is a felony. I understand that fraud is a crime. And I understand that if you do not get out of my hospital room in the next 10 seconds, I am going to have the police escort you out, and I will file a report with social services myself." Mason opened his mouth to argue, but Tyler grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Mason!" Tyler hissed, his eyes wide with fear. "Just let's go!" Mason yanked his arm away, but he knew he was beaten. He glared at Dr. Chen with pure venom, then looked at me one last time. "You are making a mistake, Dad. You are going to rot in this hospital, and you are going to wish you listened to us." They turned and walked out the door, leaving a silence that felt heavy and electric. I lay back against the pillows, tears streaming down my face. They were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage. They were tears of clarity. Dr. Chen stood by my side, watching me. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. He knew better. "I am sorry, Ben," he said softly. "I should have told you sooner, but I had to be sure." I reached out and grabbed his hand. My grip was weak, but I held on as if he were a lifeline. "Thank you," I whispered. "You gave me the truth." Dr. Chen nodded. "Now the question is, what do you want to do with it?" "My Uncle Victor is expecting a call. He needs a house manager. He needs a friend. And I think you need a place to go that isn't Yakima." I looked at the ceiling, where the tiles formed a grid. I imagined my house, the one that was now sold to strangers. I imagined Mason and Tyler counting their money, thinking they had gotten away with it. They thought the game was over. They thought they had checkmated the king. But they forgot one thing. The game does not end until the king is off the board. And thanks to Dr. Chen, I was still very much in the game. I am not going to Yakima, I said, my voice finding a new strength. And I am not going to let them keep that money. Make the call, doctor. Tell your uncle I am coming. Dr. Chen smiled, a genuine warmth returning to his face. I will make the arrangements. But Ben, you need to play this smart. Let them think they won. Let them think you are confused and helpless. That is your greatest weapon right now. I understood. It was a strategy I had used 1,000 times in the boardroom at Boeing. Never let the adversary know you have found the flaw in their design until you are ready to bring the whole structure down. I wiped the tears from my face. I closed my eyes and visualized the plan. I would play the part. I would be the broken old man. I would let them drive me away in their ambulance. And while they were popping champagne, I would be building their prison brick by brick. The beep of the heart monitor was steady now. It was no longer a countdown to the end. It was the rhythm of a war drum. And the war had just begun. The adrenaline that had fueled my defiance began to ebb away, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. The room suddenly felt very large and very cold. I looked at Dr. Chen, who had pulled up a chair and sat down beside my bed. The silence between us was not awkward. It was the shared silence of two men who understood the ugly mechanics of betrayal. I took a shaky breath and looked out the window, where the gray Seattle rain was starting to streak against the glass. It was a view I had seen 1,000 times, but today it looked different. It looked like a world I no longer belonged to. Doctor, I said, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts to remain stoic. I appreciate what you did. You stopped them from bullying me today. But the reality is that they have the power of attorney. They have the money, and I have nowhere to go. My house is gone. My accounts are likely frozen or drained. If I do not go to Yakima, I am effectively homeless. I felt the weight of my 70 years pressing down on me. I had worked my whole life to be independent, to be the provider. The thought of sleeping on a park bench or in a shelter while my sons drank champagne in my house was a humiliation sharper than any surgical scalpel. Dr. Chen leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at me with an intensity that demanded my full attention. You are not homeless, Ben, he said firmly. You are at a crossroads, and I think I have a path for you that you haven't considered. He paused, glancing at the door to ensure we were truly alone before continuing. I told you about my Uncle Victor. Let me tell you who he really is. Victor Chen was one of the early lead engineers at Microsoft. He wrote code that is probably running the systems in this hospital right now. He is brilliant, he is wealthy, and he is living in a nightmare. I listened, the engineer in me latching onto the data. A man like that should be retired on a yacht, I said. He lives in Medina, Dr. Chen replied. Medina. The name alone carried weight. It was the enclave of billionaires, the golden zip code across the lake where the tech titans lived behind high walls and iron gates. He has an estate there that overlooks the water. Dr. Chen continued, but he is a prisoner in his own palace. His wife passed away 5 years ago, and they never had children. But he has nieces and nephews, a lot of them. And just like your sons, they see him as a walking bank account. Dr. Chen's face tightened with frustration. They are trying to gaslight him, Ben. They move things around in his house to make him think he is losing his memory. They isolate him from his friends, telling people he is too sick for visitors. They are building a case to declare him mentally incompetent so they can take conservatorship over his estate. They want to put him in a facility and strip the house down to the studs just like your sons did to you. I felt a spark of recognition. It was the same playbook. The same greed disguised as concern. The same calculated cruelty. Why doesn't he fight back? I asked. He is tired, Dr. Chen said softly. He is 75. He is surrounded by sharks, and he doesn't know who to trust. He fires every nurse and housekeeper we hire because the family bribes them to spy on him. He is alone in a 10,000 square foot house waiting for the end. Dr. Chen looked me dead in the eye. He needs a firewall, Ben. He doesn't need a nurse who can check blood pressure. He needs a man who understands structure. He needs someone who can look at a situation, analyze the variables, and spot the sabotage. He needs an engineer. I looked at my hands, the hands that had drafted blueprints for the 747. They were wrinkled now and spotted with age, but they were still steady. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "I am proposing a job," Dr. Chen said. "My uncle needs a house manager, someone to live in the estate, to oversee the staff, to manage the security systems, and to be a companion who actually has a brain. You wouldn't be a servant, Ben. You would be his partner in holding the line. You would live in the guest wing, which is bigger than my entire house. You would have a salary, and more importantly, you would have sanctuary." He let the offer hang in the air. It sounded like a fantasy. A billionaire's estate. A way out of the trap my sons had set. "But why me?" I asked. "You don't know me. I am just a patient." Dr. Chen smiled a small, sad smile. "I know enough. I saw how you looked at that invoice. You spotted the font error in 3 seconds. I saw how you handled your sons. You didn't scream, you analyzed. You are sharp, Ben, and you have something that money cannot buy. You have a reason to fight. You understand exactly what Victor is going through because you are living it. My uncle doesn't need someone who works for a paycheck. He needs someone who understands the war. The war." Yes, that was what it was. A war between the generation that built the wealth and the generation that wanted to steal it. "If I do this," I said, thinking through the logistics, "my sons will come looking for me. They won't stop until they have me in Yakima. They need me out of the way to secure the money. We will give them what they want, Doctor." Chen said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "We will let them think they won. We will transfer you out of here tomorrow, but not to Yakima. We will create a paper trail that leads to a dead end. To them, you will be a confused old man safely tucked away in a facility. In reality, you will be in Medina helping Victor fortify his defenses." I felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with medication. It was the thrill of a new project, a complex problem that needed solving. My sons thought I was obsolete. They thought I was a broken cog to be discarded. But Dr. Chen was offering me a chance to be the architect of my own retribution. "And Victor?" I asked. "Does he know about this?" "He knows I was looking for someone." Dr. Chen nodded. "If you agree, I will call him right now. He is desperate for conversation with someone who isn't trying to sell him funeral insurance. You two have a lot in common. You both built things that changed the world, and you both raised families that betrayed you." I looked back out the window. The rain didn't look depressing anymore. It looked like a cleansing wash. I thought about Mason and Tyler celebrating their victory tonight. I thought about the house in Queen Anne, empty and sold. I could not go back there. That chapter was closed. But I didn't have to end the book. I turned back to the doctor. "I have a condition," I said. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "I need access to technology," I said. "If I am going to live in Medina, if I am going to protect your uncle, I need to be able to track what my sons are doing. I need to know where my money went. I need to gather evidence." Dr. Chen grinned. "Victor has a server room that rivals the Pentagon. You will have everything you need." I took a deep breath. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was manageable now. It was just background noise to the mission ahead. "Make the call, doctor," I said. "Tell your uncle he has a new house manager. And tell him I am bringing my own toolbox." Dr. Chen stood up and shook my hand. His grip was firm. "Welcome to the resistance, Ben." As he walked out of the room to make the call, I lay back on the pillows. For the first time since I woke up, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man with a plan. My sons had taken my past, but they had no idea I had just secured a very dangerous future. I closed my eyes and began to draft the schematics in my mind. Step 1 was escape. Step 2 was fortification. And Step 3 would be total system failure for Mason and Tyler. I was not just fighting for a roof over my head anymore. I was fighting for every father who had ever been discarded by the children he raised. And I intended to win. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long, striped shadows across the bedsheets. But I did not greet it with the usual clarity of a man who had spent his life engineering precision aircraft. Instead, I let my jaw go slack. I stared blankly at a water stain on the ceiling tile and let my hands tremble with a calculated rhythm. I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. When Mason and Tyler walked into the room accompanied by a nurse and 2 transport specialists, I did not look at them. I looked through them. I focused my eyes on a point somewhere behind their heads, a trick I had learned from an old pilot who suffered from shell shock. "Where is Martha?" I mumbled, my voice pitched high and confused. "I need to tell her that the gardenias are blooming. She hates it when I forget to water the gardenias." I saw Mason exchange a look with Tyler. It was a look of pure, unadulterated relief. To them, my apparent decline was not a tragedy, it was a convenience. It meant no more questions about the house. It meant no lawsuits. It meant the money was safe. "She is at the store," Dad Mason said, his voice loud and slow as if he were talking to a toddler. "She will meet you at the new house. You just go with these nice men, and they will take you to her." Liar. Martha had been in the ground for 5 years, but I nodded slowly, letting a drool of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth before wiping it away with a shaking hand. "Okay," I whispered. "I want to go home." "We are sending you home, Dad," Tyler added, though he couldn't even look me in the face. He was busy tapping away on his phone, probably checking the price of the cryptocurrency he had bought with my life savings. The transport team moved efficiently. They were not the rough, overworked EMTs I had expected. They wore crisp Navy uniforms and moved with a professional silence that felt more like a security detail than a medical transport. I let them shift me onto the gurney, my body limp and compliant. As they wheeled me out into the hallway, I caught one last glimpse of my sons. They were standing by the nurse's station signing the discharge papers. Mason was laughing at something the nurse said, and Tyler was stretching his arms over his head like a man who had just finished a marathon. They did not wave. They did not walk me to the elevator. They had discarded the package, and now they were free. The elevator doors closed, severing the connection between my past and my future. I kept up the act in the elevator, staring at the floor, mumbling about the rain, until we reached the loading dock. The air outside was cool and damp, the signature Seattle mist clinging to my skin. They loaded me into the back of a black Mercedes Sprinter van. It was unmarked. There were no logos for Golden Pines Living Center. The interior was lined with plush leather and soft lighting, unlike any ambulance I had ever seen. The driver, a man with a thick neck and eyes that missed nothing, closed the rear doors and locked them. He walked around to the front and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, a quiet, powerful hum. As we pulled away from the hospital, I waited. I watched the city pass by through the tinted windows. We hit the highway, but instead of heading east toward the mountains and the desolate stretch of road that led to Yakima, the driver took the exit for the floating bridge. We were heading west. We were heading toward the water. "Mr. Ross," the driver said, his voice coming through the intercom system, clear and respectful. "You can drop the act now. We are clear of the perimeter." I sat up straight, the tremors in my hands vanishing instantly. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell of antiseptic. "Are we being followed?" I asked, my voice returning to its normal baritone. "Negative," the driver replied. "Your sons are currently heading toward a steakhouse in downtown Seattle. They think you are on a 3-hour transport to the middle of nowhere. By the time they realize you never checked in at Golden Pines, we will be inside the fortress. The fortress. That was what Dr. Chen had called it. We crossed the bridge, the gray water of Lake Washington churning below us. On the other side lay Medina, the enclave of the ultra-wealthy. We drove past high hedges and security gates that guarded the privacy of tech billionaires and industry titans. The van slowed down as we approached a massive set of wrought iron gates. They were imposing, topped with spikes, and flanked by stone pillars that housed cameras. The driver punched in a code, and the gates swung open silently. We drove up a winding driveway lined with ancient cedar trees that blocked out the sky. At the top of the hill stood the house. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel perched on the edge of the cliff overlooking the lake. It was beautiful, but it was also cold. It looked like a bunker designed by an architect who hated people. The van stopped under the porte cochere. The side door slid open, and Dr. Chen was there waiting for me. He was not wearing his white coat. He was in casual clothes, looking less like a surgeon and more like a nephew visiting his favorite uncle. "Welcome to the Resistance, Ben," he said, offering me a hand to step down. I stepped out onto the gravel, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. "Is he here?" I asked. "He is in the library," Dr. Chen said. "He has been watching the security feed since you crossed the bridge. He is anxious to meet the man who fooled his own children." We walked through the massive front doors into a foyer that echoed with emptiness. The house was immaculate, but it felt sterile. There were no family photos, no coats on the rack. It was a house waiting for a life. Dr. Chen led me down a long hallway to a set of double doors made of dark mahogany. He pushed them open. The library was a wall of books and screens. On one side, floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with technical manuals and literature. On the other side, a bank of monitors displayed live feeds from every corner of the estate. Sitting in the center of the room, in a high-backed leather chair, was Victor Chen. He was a small man, frail-looking, with thinning white hair. But when he turned his chair to face me, his eyes were sharp and alert, burning with an intelligence that age had not dimmed. He did not look like a victim. He looked like a general who had been under siege for too long. "So you are the engineer," Victor said, his voice raspy but firm. "Leo tells me you analyzed a forged document in 3 seconds while recovering from open-heart surgery." I walked forward, stopping a few feet from him. "And Leo tells me you wrote the code that runs the world, but you cannot get your nephews to stop stealing your silverware." Victor let out a dry laugh, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "They steal more than silverware, Mr. Ross. They are stealing my sanity. They move my glasses. They change the passwords on my accounts and tell me I forgot them. They whisper in the other room and stop when I enter. They are trying to gaslight me into a grave. I know the feeling," I said. "My son sold my house while I was sleeping. They looked me in the eye and told me it was for my own good." Victor nodded slowly. "The betrayal is a specific kind of pain, isn't it? It is not like a wound from an enemy. It is like a structural failure from within the materials you trusted most." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Ben. We have a lot of work to do." I sat. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of belonging. "Leo says you need a house manager," Victor said, leaning forward. "I do not need a manager. I can manage my house. What I need is a second set of eyes. I need someone who can help me trap them. I have the technology, but I lack the mobility. I need a field agent." I looked at the bank of monitors. I saw the cameras covering the driveway, the gardens, the interior hallways. "I can do that," I said. "I spent 40 years troubleshooting systems for Boeing. If there is a flaw in their plan, I will find it." Victor smiled, and for a moment he looked 10 years younger. "Good. Because my nephews are coming for dinner on Sunday. They are bringing a lawyer. They think they are going to force me to sign a conservatorship. They think I am alone. I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms. They are in for a surprise. Victor pressed a button on his armrest, and a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a hidden server room humming with blue lights. This house is wired with microphones and cameras in every room, Victor said. Even the bathrooms. If they whisper a secret, we will hear it. If they make a move, we will see it. But I need you to be the face they do not expect. Who do you want to be, Ben? I thought about it. I thought about Mason and Tyler celebrating their victory. I thought about the fake invoices and the cheap nursing home. I want to be the ghost in the machine, I said. But to them, I will just be the new staff. The old man who mops the floors and forgets to lock the doors. Let them underestimate me. That is how we catch them. Victor extended his hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. Deal, he said. Welcome to Medina. As I shook his hand, I knew that the dynamic had shifted. My sons thought they had sent me to a prison to die. Instead, they had sent me to a command center. I looked at the screens, at the blinking lights of the server room, and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. Mason and Tyler had started a fire. But they had no idea that I had just joined forces with the man who owned the water supply. The game was on, and this time I was playing with a full deck. Living in the shadows became my new reality, and I found a strange comfort in it. While the rest of the world thought Benedict Ross was suffering from dementia in a budget nursing home in Yakima, I was actually sitting in a leather ergonomic chair in Medina, sipping Victor Chen's private reserve oolong tea. My days of designing aircraft wings were over, but my nights were consumed by a new kind of engineering. I was engineering the downfall of my own children. Victor had given me access to what he called the God's Eye. It was a terrifyingly sophisticated piece of software he had developed years ago, originally intended for corporate espionage defense, but now repurposed for domestic warfare. Because Mason and Tyler had used my personal information to access my accounts, and because they had been foolish enough to link their devices to my old family cloud network, for convenience, Victor was able to mirror their digital lives. I could see what they saw. I could hear what they said. And what I witnessed in those first few days made my blood run cold. They had wasted no time. Less than 48 hours after they thought they had disposed of me, Mason and Tyler had moved into a penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle. Through the camera of Mason's laptop, which he left open on the kitchen island, I watched them. The apartment was a glass box in the sky, with a view of the Space Needle that cost more per month than I used to make in a year. I watched as Mason popped the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon. The foam spilled over his hands onto the quartz counter, and he just laughed, wiping it on his pants. He looked like a king who had just conquered a kingdom, but I knew he was just a scavenger feasting on a carcass. To the good life, Mason toasted, raising his glass to Tyler. To not having to worry about mortgage payments or that dusty old house anymore. Tyler was lounging on a white leather sofa that looked uncomfortable but expensive. He was scrolling through his phone, probably buying more of those digital coins that had ruined him in the first place. You know, I almost feel bad for the old man, Tyler said, though his voice lacked any real empathy. The nurse at Golden Pines said he was asking for Mom again when they checked him in. Mason waved his hand dismissively. He is happy in his own world, Tyler. He has his pudding and his bingo. We have a future to build. Besides, we earned this, dealing with him all these years, listening to his lectures about saving and hard work. It was exhausting. I sat in the dark of Victor's library and listened to my son rewrite history. He called my guidance exhausting. He called my love a burden. I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles turned white. They were spending the equity of my life on champagne and rent for a lifestyle they could not sustain. But as I watched them over the next few days, I noticed something else. The euphoria of the theft was wearing off, and the reality of their greed was setting in. They were burning through the cash at an alarming rate. Between the penthouse deposit, the new lease on a Tesla for Tyler and pay on off Mason's gambling debts, the $850,000 was shrinking fast. It was on a Tuesday evening that the conversation shifted. I was monitoring an audio feed from Tyler's phone while he was driving. He had called Mason in a panic. "Mason, we have a problem," Tyler said, his voice tight. "The crypto market tanked again. I am down another 50,000, and Megan wants to redo the kitchen in your house. We are going to bleed out in 6 months if we do not find another revenue stream." I leaned closer to the speaker. This was it. The desperation. "Calm down, Tyler," Mason replied, his voice sounding tinny over the car Bluetooth. "We still have the other asset." "What other asset?" Tyler asked. "We sold the house, we sold the car. The old man's pension is barely enough to cover his facility costs." "You are forgetting the basement," Mason said. The line went silent for a moment. My heart skipped a beat. "Oh, the basement. You mean the safe," Tyler whispered. "But Dad always said that was empty. He said he sold the gold coins years ago to pay for your law school tuition." Mason laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "Dad was a hoarder, Tyler. He never sold anything. He lied to us to teach us a lesson about frugality or some nonsense. I remember seeing him down there 2 years ago, right before Mom got sick. He was polishing them. There is a false panel behind the workbench. I bet there is at least $200,000 worth of Krugerrands in there." I sat back in my chair, stunned. They were talking about the collection of gold coins my father had left me. It was true I had told them I sold it. I wanted them to build their own wealth, not wait for mine. But I had not sold it. I had hidden it deep in a wall safe behind the workbench in the basement of the Queen Anne house. But here was the catch. I had removed those coins 3 days before my surgery. I had moved them to a safety deposit box at the bank because I had a bad feeling. The safe in the basement was empty. However, they did not know that. Mason continued, his voice dropping lower. "The new owners do not move in until the 1st of the month. That gives us 3 days. The house is empty. The keys are in the lockbox, but I kept a copy of the back door key just in case." "You want to break in?" Tyler asked, sounding nervous but intrigued. "It is not breaking in if it is our house," Mason rationalized. "Technically, the deed has not been recorded yet. It is a gray area. We go in tonight. We get the gold. We get out. No one will ever know." I looked at the screen. I saw the greed on Tyler's face even though he was miles away. He was nodding. He was going to do it. I realized then that this was not just a violation. This was an opportunity. My sons were planning to commit a felony, burglary, breaking and entering. They were going to walk right into a trap that they were setting for themselves. I turned to Victor, who had been listening from his wheelchair in the corner. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Victor nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They are going back to the scene of the crime." "I need to get there first," I said. "I need to make sure they find exactly what they deserve." Victor spun his chair around and typed a command on his keyboard. A blueprint of my old house appeared on the main screen. He had pulled it from the city records. "You said the safe is empty," Victor noted. "It is," I replied. "Then we need to fill it," Victor said. "If they break into an empty safe, they will just leave disappointed. But if they find something that turns them against each other, something that exposes their true nature, then we have them." I looked at the blueprint. I looked at the basement layout. I knew every inch of that house. I knew that the security system was still active but currently disabled because of the sale. I knew the code. "I can get in," I said. "I can plant a bait." Victor's eyes twinkled. "I have some very interesting props in my storage. Fake gold bars, documents. But I think the best trap is one that plays on their paranoia." I stood up, the pain in my chest forgotten. I knew exactly what to do. I was going to use their own greed to destroy them. I would go back to my house one last time. I would set the stage. And when Mason and Tyler crept into that basement looking for salvation, they would find a judgment day they never expected. Prepare the van, I told Victor. I have a home invasion to plan. As I walked out of the library, I felt a cold resolve. My sons wanted the gold. They wanted the final pieces of my legacy. Well, I was going to give them a legacy. I was going to give them a night they would never forget. The cameras in the house were still connected to my cloud account. I would record every second of it. I would let them incriminate themselves in high definition. The war in the shadows was over. It was time to bring the battle into the light. And the basement of the house they sold was going to be the battlefield. The key turned in the lock with a familiar click, a sound that echoed through the hollow shell of what used to be my life. It was 2 a.m, and the streetlights of Queen Anne cast long, distorted shadows against the siding of the house. I was trespassing in my own home, or at least what used to be my home. Victor had moved faster than lightning. His shell company had purchased the property in an all-cash deal just hours after my sons put it on the market, closing the sale while the ink was still wet. To Mason and Tyler, the buyer was just a faceless LLC, a corporate entity that wouldn't take possession until the first of the month. They had no idea that the new owner was waiting in a black surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, and that the intruder standing in the foyer was their father. I stepped inside and the smell hit me instantly. It was the scent of lemon pledge and stale air, but underneath that was the ghost of Martha's perfume and the lingering aroma of the Sunday roasts we used to cook. The house was empty now. My sons had sold the furniture, the paintings, and even the rugs. The floors I had sanded by hand were bare and scuffed. It felt like walking into a mausoleum. But I did not come here to mourn. I came here to set a trap. In my heavy canvas bag, I carried the instruments of their destruction. Victor had provided the props from his theatrical days and his engineering lab. I had 20 heavy gold bars. They looked real, and they felt real heavy and cold to the touch. But they were tungsten cores plated in 24-karat gold, worthless to a dealer, but priceless for what I intended to do. I made my way to the basement, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight. I remembered every loose board and stepped over them instinctively. The basement was dark, a cavern of concrete and memories. My workbench was still there, too heavy for them to move quickly. Behind it, hidden by a pegboard of tools, was the wall safe. I moved the pegboard and spun the dial. The combination was still the same. The door swung open, revealing the empty metal box. I began to stack the fake gold bars inside. One by one, they clinked together, a sound that I knew would sing like a siren song to my greedy sons. But the gold was just the bait. The real trap was the ledger. I pulled out a small black notebook, the kind I used to use to track household expenses. I had spent the afternoon with Victor forging entries in handwriting that looked remarkably like my own, but with a shaky tremor to simulate my recent health issues. On the last page, I had written a specific entry dated 2 days prior. Loan to Mason. 10 bars. To cover gambling debt. I placed the notebook on top of the stack of gold. It was a simple lie, but it was designed to tap into the deepest insecurity of their relationship. Tyler knew Mason was a gambler. Mason knew Tyler was paranoid. I was just lighting the fuse. I closed the safe and replaced the pegboard. I dusted off my footprints as I backed out of the basement and out of the house. I locked the door and returned to the van where Victor was waiting, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. "Now we wait," he said, handing me a thermos of coffee. We didn't have to wait long. At 3:15 in the morning, a dark sedan rolled down the street with its headlights off. It parked 3 houses down. I watched on the screen as 2 figures emerged dressed in dark hoodies like low-budget cat burglars. Mason and Tyler. My legacy. They crept through the side gate, moving with a clumsiness that would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. I switched the audio feed on. "Be quiet, you idiot," Mason hissed. "The neighbors have ring cameras." "I'm trying," Tyler whispered back. "I told you we should have brought the bolt cutters." "I have the key," Mason snapped. "Just shut up and watch the street." They reached the back door. I watched Mason fumble with the key, his hands shaking. The door opened, and they slipped inside. I switched the camera view to the interior, tracking them as they moved through the kitchen and down the hall. They didn't look at the empty rooms. They didn't pause to feel the weight of the space. They headed straight for the basement stairs. "They are greedy little rats, aren't they?" Victor murmured, shaking his head. I watched in silence as they reached the basement. They turned on their flashlights, the beams cutting through the gloom. They went straight to the workbench. Mason shoved the pegboard aside with a violence that made me flinch. "Do the combo," Tyler said, his voice tight with anticipation. Mason spun the dial. Left, right, left. Click. The safe door swung open. The beam of their flashlights hit the gold. For a second, there was total silence. Then a collective gasp. "Oh my God," Tyler breathed. "It's real." He wasn't lying. "Look at that shine, Mason. That is pure gold." Mason reached in and grabbed a bar, weighing it in his hand. "This is it, Tyler. This is our ticket. This is easily 200 grand, maybe more. We are saved." They began to grab the bars, shoving them into the duffel bags they had brought. It was a feeding frenzy. But then Tyler's hand brushed against the black notebook. "What is this?" he asked, pulling it out. "Who cares?" Mason said, focused on the gold. "Just grab the loot and let's go." Tyler opened the book. He shined his light on the page. I saw his body stiffen. I saw the exact moment the poison entered his system. "You son of a bitch," Tyler whispered. What Mason asked, still counting the bars. Tyler shoved the notebook into Mason's chest. "You liar. You came here already. You came here 2 days ago." Mason looked at the book, reading the entry I had forged. "What?" "No, I didn't. This is crazy. I haven't been here since the surgery." "It says right here," Tyler shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Loan to Mason, 10 bars. You took half the stash before we even got here. You told me the safe was full." "Mason, where are the other 10 bars?" "I didn't take them," Mason yelled back, dropping the bag. "The old man is senile. He probably wrote that because he was confused. Or maybe he spent them himself." "Don't lie to me," Tyler screamed, lunging at his brother. "You have been acting shady all week. You paid off your bookie, didn't you? You used the gold to save your own skin, and you were going to split the rest with me 50-50. You are stealing from me." "I did not take it," Mason roared, pushing Tyler back. Tyler didn't listen. He swung his fist, connecting squarely with Mason's jaw. Mason stumbled back, tripping over the tool chest. He scrambled up, his face twisted with rage. "You want to go, little brother?" Mason spat. "Fine." The fight was ugly. It wasn't a cinematic brawl. It was 2 grown men rolling on the dirty concrete floor of their father's basement, clawing and punching like animals. They knocked over the shelves, sending jars of nails and screws crashing to the floor. Mason slammed Tyler into the workbench. Tyler kicked Mason in the stomach. I watched the monitor, my expression unmoving. I should have felt horror. I should have wanted to run in there and break it up. But all I felt was a cold finality. These were the boys I had protected from the world. I had shielded them from consequences for 30 years, and now, in the absence of my protection, they were tearing each other apart over fool's gold. Tyler managed to pin Mason down, his hands around his brother's collar. "Admit it," he screamed. "Admit you stole my share." "I didn't steal it, you paranoid junkie," Mason wheezed, blood trickling from his lip. "But now that I think about it, maybe I should have." "You are a loser, Tyler. You always have been. Dad knew it. That is why he wrote that. He knew you would turn on me." Tyler punched him again hard. Then he grabbed his duffel bag, which contained half the fake gold, and scrambled to his feet. "I am taking this," he panted, backing away. "And don't you dare follow me." "We are done, Mason." Tyler ran up the stairs, leaving Mason groaning on the floor, surrounded by scattered screws and the remaining bars of fake gold. I watched Mason struggle to sit up, wiping blood from his mouth. He looked at the gold bars on the floor, then at the empty stairs. He let out a scream of frustration that sounded more like a howl. Victor turned off the monitor. "The seed is planted," he said softly. I nodded. "They hate each other now," I said. "The trust is gone. They will spend the next few days looking over their shoulders, terrified that the other one is going to hat them out or steal the rest. And when they try to sell that gold," Victor added, "they are going to get a very nasty surprise." I looked at the black screen where my family had just imploded. "Let's go," I said. "I have more evidence to gather." As the van pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. I knew that the real haunting wasn't the ghost of my wife or the memories of the past. The real haunting was the greed that had just turned brothers into enemies. And I was the one who had summoned it. The war had just claimed its first casualties, and they were my own sons. But the hardest part was realizing that I didn't regret it. Not one bit. They had chosen money over blood. I was just making sure the currency was counterfeit. If you think the betrayal of a son is painful, wait until you see the cold calculation of a daughter-in-law. I had spent the last 48 hours watching Mason and Tyler tear each other apart over fake gold bars, but as I sat in the command center of Victor's estate, I realized the rot in my family went much deeper than just my sons. They were the architects of my misery, but their wives were the ones pouring the concrete. Megan and Sienna. To the outside world, they were supportive partners standing by their husbands during a difficult family transition. But through the lens of Victor's surveillance network, I saw them for what they truly were. They were parasites attached to dying hosts, and they were preparing to jump ship before the wreckage dragged them down. I turned my attention to the monitor labeled Subject A, which was tracking Megan. She was supposed to be at a yoga retreat in Bellevue to manage her stress. Instead, the GPS tracker on her car showed she was parked at a boutique hotel in downtown Seattle. I switched to the audio feed from her phone, which she had carelessly left on the table during lunch. The voice that came through the speakers was not the sweet, concerned tone she used when asking about my health. It was sharp and mocking. "He is a total mess," Derek Megan said, followed by the clink of silverware on china. "Mason is losing his mind. He is paranoid about his brother stealing some imaginary gold. He is barely sleeping. I give it 2 weeks before he cracks completely." A male voice laughed, a deep, smooth baritone that I recognized. It was Derek Vance, the estate attorney Mason had hired to handle the sale of my house. The man who was supposed to be protecting my son's legal interests was having a 3-martini lunch with Mason's wife. "So what is the plan?" Derek asked. "The plan is simple," Megan replied. "We get the power of attorney expanded to include the remaining liquid assets. You draft the papers saying Ben is incapacitated and that Mason is unfit due to stress. So, we transfer the remaining funds to the shell account in the Caymans, and then I file for divorce." "I am not going down with him, Derek. I married a rising star, not a neurotic, broke loser." I felt a chill run down my spine. Megan was not just cheating on Mason. She was conspiring with his own lawyer to rob him blind. She was going to frame him as unstable, take the money, and run off with the man Mason was paying $500 an hour. It was a level of treachery that almost impressed me with its efficiency. I switched the feed to Subject B, Sienna. Tyler's wife was less sophisticated than Megan, but far more dangerous in her simplicity. Tyler was the tech guy, the crypto enthusiast, but he was lazy. He left his passwords on sticky notes. He left his digital wallets logged in. I watched through the camera in the penthouse living room. Tyler was out trying to sell the fake gold bars at a pawn shop, a fool's errand that I knew would end in humiliation. Sienna was alone in the apartment. She was sitting at Tyler's dual monitor setup, typing furiously. I zoomed in on the screen. She was on a crypto exchange platform. She was moving Ethereum and Bitcoin from Tyler's cold wallet to an external address. The numbers were staggering. She was draining every cent he had left, every coin he had managed to salvage from the crash. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "It is done," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the front door. "I moved the coins. I booked the flight to Bali for tomorrow night. One way." I listened as she spoke to someone on the other end. "No, he has no idea," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Tyler thinks he is a genius, but he is an idiot. He thinks we are going to be rich when the market turns. I am not waiting for a miracle. I am taking the cash and disappearing. He can deal with his crazy brother and his vegetable father on his own." I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. There it was. The complete dissection of my family. My sons had betrayed me for money, and now the women they loved were betraying them for the exact same reason. It was a perfect circle of greed. Victor rolled his wheelchair up beside me. "It is like a Shakespearean tragedy," he murmured. "Everyone is holding a dagger behind someone else's back." I looked at the screens. I saw Megan clinking glasses with her lover. I saw Sienna packing a suitcase with designer clothes she had bought with my retirement money. "Do we stop them?" Victor asked. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We do not stop them. We accelerate them." I opened the editing software on the main server. I had the audio of Megan plotting with the lawyer. I had the screen recording of Sienna draining the crypto wallet. I had the GPS logs. I had everything. I spent the next hour acting as the editor of their destruction. I clipped the audio files, ensuring the context was undeniable. I took screenshots of the transaction logs. Then I prepared 2 anonymous emails. The first email was addressed to Mason. Subject line: "Your lawyer is screwing more than just your billable hours." I attached the audio file of Megan and Derek at the hotel, along with photos of them entering the elevator together, which I pulled from the hotel's security feed that Victor had cracked. The second email was addressed to Tyler. Subject line: "Check your wallet before she checks her bag." I attached the video of Sienna transferring the funds and the itinerary for her flight to Bali. I hovered my finger over the enter key. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this, the implosion would be total. There would be no reconciliation. There would be no going back. I thought about the day Mason married Megan. I thought about how happy he looked. I thought about Tyler defending Sienna to me when I said she seemed materialistic. They loved these women. Or they thought they did. But they did not love me enough to protect me. They threw me away. And now I was simply returning the favor by showing them the truth. I pressed send. The data packets traveled through the fiber optic cables at the speed of light. I imagined them as invisible missiles flying across Lake Washington, aimed directly at the penthouse in downtown Seattle. I switched the view back to the living room camera in the penthouse. It was quiet for now. Sienna was zipping up her suitcase. Mason had just walked in the front door looking defeated, presumably after being laughed out of the pawn shop with his fake gold. Tyler walked in a moment later looking equally miserable. The tension in the room was palpable. The brothers were not speaking to each other, still fuming over the gold. Then it happened. Ding! Mason's phone chimed in his pocket. Ding! Tyler's phone chimed on the counter. I watched as they both reached for their devices. I watched the color drain from Mason's face as he played the audio file. I saw his hand start to shake. He looked up slowly, his eyes locking on the bedroom door where Megan was pretending to nap. I watched Tyler tap on his screen. I saw his eyes go wide. He frantically opened his crypto app. He refreshed the page. Zero balance. He looked up at Sienna, who was walking out of the bedroom with her suitcase. "Where are you going?" Tyler asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sienna froze. "Oh, just to my mom's for a few days," she lied smoothly. "You are going to Bali," Tyler screamed, throwing his phone at the wall. "You stole my money! You stole everything!" At the same moment, Mason kicked the bedroom door open. "Megan," he roared, holding up his phone. "You and Derek, you and my lawyer!" The penthouse erupted. It was a symphony of chaos. Mason was screaming at Megan, who was screaming back that he was a loser. Tyler was trying to grab Sienna's suitcase, and she was clawing at his face. The brothers who were supposed to be united against the world were now fighting two separate wars in the same living room. I watched it all from the silence of the library. I saw the vases shatter. I saw the accusations fly. I saw the facade of their successful lives crumble into dust. Victor poured 2 glasses of scotch and slid one across the desk to me. "To the truth," Victor said. "To the truth," I replied, taking a sip. The scotch was smooth and warm. On the screen, my family was destroying itself. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the pain of the heart surgery. I felt the relief of a surgeon who had finally cut out the cancer. They were busy devouring each other, which meant they were too distracted to notice the old man in the shadows preparing the final blow. The stage was set for the grand finale, and I was ready to bring down the curtain. The storm outside the mansion was nothing compared to the storm that was about to break inside the walls of Victor Chen's estate. It was Sunday evening, and the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library, turning the view of Lake Washington into a blurred canvas of gray and black. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, listening to the rhythm of the rain and the beating of my own heart. My own family had just self-destructed in a spectacle of greed and betrayal, but there was no time to dwell on the wreckage of my past. I had a job to do. I had a new ally to protect. Victor sat in his wheelchair in the center of the grand foyer. He looked small and frail, a deliberate choice we had made. He wore a moth-eaten cardigan and sat with a blanket over his knees, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man on the edge of senility. But I knew better. I knew that under that blanket, his finger was resting on a silent alarm button, and in his ear he wore a tiny earpiece connected to my frequency. "They are here," Ben Victor's voice whispered in my ear. "The perimeter sensors just tripped. 3 cars. 6 people. The entire wolf pack has arrived." I checked the tablet in my hand. I saw the black SUVs rolling up the driveway, bypassing the intercom. They hadn't called ahead. They hadn't asked for permission. They had simply used a cloned gate code, likely stolen from a former housekeeper, to force their way onto the property. This was not a family visit. This was a hostile takeover. I watched on the security monitor as they piled out of the cars. They were a mix of Victor's nieces and nephews, led by his oldest nephew, Julian. Julian was a hedge fund manager who wore suits that cost more than my annual pension and had a smile that looked like a shark baring its teeth. He was carrying a leather portfolio, the same way a butcher carries a cleaver. They didn't knock. I heard the electronic beep of the front door smart lock being bypassed, followed by the heavy thud of the double doors swinging open. They marched into the foyer, bringing the cold, wet air with them. "Well, look who is still awake," Julian announced, his voice booming off the marble walls. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how his uncle was feeling. He just marched straight toward the wheelchair, followed by his entourage of lawyers and cousins. Victor looked up, his eyes wide with feigned confusion. "Julian," he stammered, "I wasn't expecting you. Is it Christmas already?" Julian laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "It is not Christmas, Uncle Victor, but it is time for a gift. We brought the papers, the ones we talked about, the ones that let us help you manage this big empty house. You are clearly overwhelmed. Look at you sitting in the dark. It is pathetic." One of the nieces, a woman named Claire, who was holding a coffee cup from a drive-through, started wandering around the room, touching the sculptures. "It smells musty in here," she complained. "We are going to have to gut this place, Julian. Maybe knock down the east wing to put in a pool. I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. They were talking about renovating the house while the owner was still sitting in it. They were treating him like a piece of furniture that needed to be moved to storage. Julian pulled a thick stack of documents from his portfolio and thrust them into Victor's lap. Sign here, here, and here. It grants us full conservatorship. We will handle the bills, we will handle the staff, and we will find you a nice facility where you can rest. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. And if I don't sign, Victor asked, his voice trembling perfectly. Julian leaned down, his face inches from Victor's. Then we will have you declared incompetent by the court. We have doctors on our payroll who will testify that you are losing your mind. We will throw you in a state-run ward and you will die alone. Sign the papers, uncle. Do not make this difficult. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows. I was wearing a black suit, crisp and tailored-looking, every bit the imposing figure of a head of household staff. I walked with the precision of an engineer, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I believe Mr. Chen asked you to leave, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. The group froze. Julian spun around, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. He looked me up and down, taking in my gray hair and my uniform. Who the hell are you? Julian sneered. The new butler. Get me a scotch and shut up. This is a family matter. I did not move. I did not flinch. I am the house manager, I replied calmly, and I am informing you that you are trespassing. You used an unauthorized code to enter the gate, and you forced entry into the residence. I am asking you once to leave the property. Julian laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. You have got to be kidding me. Listen, old man, I do not know who hired you, but you are fired. Get out of my face before I have you thrown out. He turned back to Victor, grabbing his uncle's wrist and forcing a pen into his hand. Sign it now. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at the structure of the room. The foyer was a perfect containment zone. The doors were heavy oak reinforced with steel cores. The windows were impact-resistant glass designed to withstand a hurricane. It was a kill box, and they had walked right into it. I tapped the screen on my tablet. Initiating lockdown protocol, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Suddenly, the lights in the foyer turned a deep crimson red. A loud mechanical clank echoed through the walls as the magnetic locks on the front doors engaged, sealing them with 5,000 pounds of pressure. Steel shutters descended over the windows, cutting off the view of the driveway. The room was instantly sealed. Julian dropped the pen. What is this? What did you do? He ran to the front door and pulled on the handle. It didn't budge. He kicked it, but it was like kicking a bank vault. The other cousins started screaming, running to the windows, only to find them covered by heavy metal grates. I stood in the center of the chaos, calm and collected. You are not going anywhere, I said. This house was designed by one of the most brilliant engineers in the world. It has a panic room mode intended to keep intruders out. But as you are discovering, it works just as well to keep intruders in. Julian marched up to me, his face purple with rage. Open these doors right now. Do you know who I am? I will sue you into oblivion. I will ruin you. I looked him in the eye and saw the same entitlement I had seen in my own sons, the same belief that the world owed them everything. You are not suing anyone, I said, because you are currently committing a felony. Home invasion, elder abuse, attempted extortion. And the best part is that every microphone and camera in this room is recording in 4K resolution. I pointed to the ceiling, where the small black domes of the cameras were blinking. Julian looked up, and the color drained from his face. He realized he had been monologuing his crimes for the audience. Victor threw off the blanket and stood up. He stood tall, his frailty vanishing in an instant. He walked over to me and stood by my side. You should have listened to the butler. Julian, Victor said, his voice strong and mocking. He gave you a chance to leave. Julian looked from me to Victor, realizing the trap. "Uncle, please. We were just joking. We were just concerned. Open the doors. Let us go, and we will never come back." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not dial a lawyer. I did not dial a negotiation team. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. I put the phone to my ear, letting them hear the ring. "This is the Medina Police Dispatch," a voice answered. "Yes," I said, my eyes locked on Julian. "This is Benedict Ross calling from the Chen estate. We have a home invasion in progress. 6 intruders. They have broken in and are threatening the homeowner. We have them secured in the foyer, but we require immediate assistance." I gave the address and hung up. "You called the cops," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "You actually called the cops on family." I stepped forward, invading his personal space. "You are not family," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You are a virus, and we just quarantined you." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The cousins were crying now, huddled in the corner. Julian slumped against the door, defeated. I looked at Victor. He wasn't smiling. He looked sad, but he also looked free. For years he had lived in fear of these people. He had let them torment him in his own home. But tonight, the power dynamic had shifted forever. Ben, Victor said softly. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," I replied. "The police are almost here. We need to give them the footage." As the blue and red lights began to flash through the cracks in the shutters, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had failed to protect my own house from my sons because I was asleep, but I had protected Victor's house because I was wide awake. The engineer in me knew that a structure is only as strong as its defenders, and tonight the fortress held. I walked over to the control panel and prepared to disengage the locks for the officers. My sons were destroying each other in a penthouse in Seattle. Victor's nephews were about to be handcuffed in Medina. The cleanup was messy, but the structural integrity of our lives was finally being restored. The wheels of justice are supposed to grind slowly, but the wheels of greed spin with a terrifying velocity. It had been 10 days since the incident at Victor's estate where my sons and their cousins were escorted off the property by police. You would think that being caught in a felonious act of home invasion would slow them down. But desperation is a powerful fuel. Mason and Tyler were cornered animals now. They had no money, they had no gold, and they had furious wives who were threatening to burn their lives to the ground. So they played their final card. They filed an emergency petition with the King County Superior Court, claiming that I, Benedict Ross, was not only missing, but suffering from acute paranoid schizophrenia and severe dementia. They were asking for immediate emergency guardianship over my person and my assets. They wanted to declare me legally incompetent so they could freeze the investigation into their fraud and seize whatever was left of my estate. I stood outside the heavy double doors of courtroom 4B. I was not wearing the hospital gown they remembered, nor the stained cardigan I had worn during their raid on Victor's house. I was wearing a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that Victor had his personal tailor adjust for me. I wore a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. My hair was trimmed, and I had shaved the gray stubble of the hospital stay. I looked like the man I used to be. I looked like the chief engineer of Boeing, not the confused geriatric patient they were describing to the judge. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door. The bailiff had let me wait in the vestibule so I could make an entrance that would shatter their narrative. Through the gap, I could hear Mason's voice. It was trembling with a theatrical sorrow that made my stomach turn. "Your Honor, Mason," was saying, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "My father has always been my hero. It breaks my heart to see him like this. After the heart surgery, he just snapped. He became paranoid. He started hallucinating that we were stealing from him. Then he ran away." We think he is living on the streets somewhere confused and alone. We just want to bring him home. We want to get him the help he needs before he hurts himself." I heard a sniffle. That would be Tyler. He was playing the role of the devastated younger son. "We hired private investigators," Tyler added, his voice thick with fake tears. "We checked every shelter in Seattle. We are terrified, Your Honor. If he doesn't take his heart medication, he could die any day. Please grant us the guardianship so we can access his medical records and authorize the police to detain him for his own safety." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The audacity was breathtaking. They were using their own crimes as evidence of my insanity. They were painting a picture of a loving family trying to save a senile patriarch, while in reality they were wolves trying to finish off a wounded deer. I heard the judge's voice. It was Judge Harrington, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. "Mr. Ross," she said, addressing their lawyer. "Derek Vance, the same man who was sleeping with Mason's wife. This is a very serious request. You are asking to strip a man of his civil liberties without him being present to defend himself. Do you have any physical evidence of his decline?" "We have affidavits from his family," Sarek replied, smooth as oil. "His sons, his daughters-in-law, even his own brother's family have all witnessed his erratic behavior. He is a danger to himself, Your Honor. Every hour we wait is a risk to his life." That was the signal. I signaled to the bailiff who was standing beside me. He was a large man who had seen the evidence Victor's lawyers had submitted earlier that morning under seal. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He winked at me and pushed the heavy doors open. The sound of the latch clicking echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. The heavy doors swung outward, and I stepped into the aisle. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air conditioner seemed to stop humming. The stenographer stopped typing. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps were steady and rhythmic, the sound of expensive leather on the parquet floor. Click, click, click. I looked straight ahead. I did not look at the gallery where Megan and Sienna sat looking bored and annoyed. I did not look at the lawyer. I looked directly at the back of my sons' heads. Mason turned around first. He had been mid-sob holding a tissue to his eyes. When he saw me, the tissue fell from his hand. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Tyler turned next. He let out a small, strangled sound. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard his knuckles turned white. They were looking at a ghost. They were looking at the victim they thought they had buried under a mountain of lies. I stopped at the gate that separated the gallery from the bench. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my chest expanded. I did not look like a man who was wandering the streets. I looked like a man who owned the building. "I am not missing," I said, my voice booming through the courtroom without a microphone. "And I am certainly not insane." Judge Harrington looked over her glasses. She looked at the papers in front of her, then at the sobbing sons, then at me. Her eyebrows shot up. "State your name for the record, sir," she commanded, though her tone was intrigued rather than authoritative. "I am Benedict Ross," I stated clearly. "I am the father of these two men, and I am here to object to this petition with extreme prejudice." Mason scrambled to his feet. He looked panicked, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "Dad," he stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "Oh my God, you are alive. We were so worried. Your Honor, look, he is delusional. He thinks he is fine, but he is clearly having an episode. He probably doesn't even know where he is." Mason rushed toward me, his arms open, trying to pull me into a hug, trying to physically dominate the space and force me into the role of the frail old man. He wanted to embrace me so he could whisper threats in my ear, so he could regain control. I did not flinch. I did not step back. When he was 2 feet away, I held up a single hand, palm out. It was a sharp, authoritarian gesture that stopped him cold. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "If you take one more step, Mason, I will have the bailiff arrest you for assault. I am not your prop, I am not your meal ticket, and I am done being your victim." Mason froze. He looked at the judge, then back at me. He didn't know what to do. The script had been flipped. Judge Harrington banged her gavel. "Mr. Ross, take a seat at the respondent's table. Mr. Vance, control your clients. This court is now in session, and I have a lot of questions." I walked to the empty table on the right side of the room. I sat down and placed a single slim folder on the desk. I looked across the aisle at my sons. They were huddled together, whispering frantically with Derek. They looked small. They looked like children who had broken a vase and were trying to glue it back together before their parents came home. "Mr. Ross," the judge said, looking at me, "your sons have sworn under oath that you are suffering from advanced dementia and that you are a flight risk. You appear to be quite lucid." I stood up again, buttoning my jacket. "Your Honor, my sons have sworn to a great many things. They swore they loved me when I was in the hospital. They swore they were protecting my interests. But as I will demonstrate today, the only thing my sons are protecting is their own greed." Derek Vance stood up, trying to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, clearly Mr. Ross is having a moment of clarity. This is common with his condition. It is called terminal lucidity. We shouldn't be fooled by a nice suit and a good haircut. He needs medical supervision." I turned to Derek. I looked him up and down with the same clinical detachment I used to use when inspecting a faulty engine part. "And you must be Mr. Vance," I said. "The lawyer who is billing my estate $500 an hour to help my son steal my money while simultaneously sleeping with his wife at the Fairmont Hotel." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Megan shrieked from the gallery. "You liar!" Judge Harrington banged her gavel again, harder this time. "Order. Order in this court." "Mr. Ross, those are serious accusations. They are not accusations." "Your Honor," I said, tapping the folder on my desk. "They are facts, and I have brought the receipts." I looked at Mason and Tyler. They were not crying anymore. They were staring at me with pure terror. They realized then that I had not just come to defend myself. I had come to prosecute them. The courtroom was no longer their stage. It was my operating table, and I was about to perform surgery without anesthesia. "I am ready to proceed." "Your Honor," I said, sitting back down. "And I would like to call my first witness." The doors opened again, and Dr. Leo Chen walked in, followed by a team of forensic accountants. The look on Mason's face was worth every second of pain I had endured. It was the look of a man watching his life implode in slow motion. The trap was sprung, the cage door was closed, and there was nowhere left to run. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster, a vacuum of air before the thunder cracks. Dr. Leo Chen walked to the witness stand with the confident stride of a man who deals in matters of life and death every single day. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. As he sat down, he adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Derek Vance, the lawyer, who had been smugly confident just 5 minutes ago. Now Vance looked like a man who realized he had brought a knife to a gunfight. "Your Honor," Dr. Chen began, his voice calm but projecting to every corner of the room. "I am the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Seattle Grace. I performed the triple bypass surgery on Benedict Ross. I am here to testify that the medical narrative presented by these two men is a complete fabrication." The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Explain yourself, doctor." Dr. Chen pulled a document from his pocket. It was the original surgical log. "Mr. Ross's surgery was a textbook success," he stated clearly. "There were no complications. There was no cognitive decline. And most importantly, there was absolutely no reason for his insurance to deny coverage. Mr. Ross has the best insurance plan Boeing offers. The claim that his sons needed to liquidate his assets to pay for life-saving measures is a lie. I looked at Mason. He was shaking his head frantically, mouthing the word no to his lawyer. Tyler was staring at his shoes, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. But that is not the most disturbing part, Your Honor. Dr. Chen continued, turning his gaze to my sons. On the morning of the surgery, while my patient was under anesthesia, I stepped out to the waiting room to give the family an update. I expected to see anxious sons. Instead, I saw a notary public. I saw documents spread out on the coffee table. I heard them discussing a wire transfer. They weren't praying for their father's survival. They were finalizing the sale of his house before he could wake up to stop them. Objection! Derek Vance shouted, jumping to his feet. This is hearsay. The doctor is speculating on the nature of a private conversation. Overruled. Judge Harrington snapped her voice like a whip. Sit down, Mr. Vance. I want to hear this. I stood up slowly. I adjusted my cuffs and looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. The doctor's testimony is not hearsay. It is a verified fact. And I can prove it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. It was a small silver piece of plastic, but it held the weight of my entire case. During my time staying with Mr. Victor Chen, I utilized his forensic software to recover data from my personal cloud account, I explained. My sons were foolish enough to sync their devices to my family network years ago and never disconnected them. When they recorded their little victory celebration in the hospital waiting room to send to their wives, they didn't realize it uploaded directly to my server. I handed the drive to the bailiff. I would like to enter this video into evidence as Exhibit A, I said. The judge nodded to the bailiff, who plugged the drive into the court's projection system. A large screen descended from the ceiling. The room dimmed. Suddenly the image flickered to life. It was shaky handheld footage from a phone, but the picture was clear. It showed the sterile waiting room of the hospital. Mason's face filled the frame, grinning like a shark. Say hello to the new millionaires, Mason said to the camera, laughing. The camera panned to Tyler, who was signing a thick stack of papers on the low table. Behind him, a man in a cheap suit was stamping documents. Is it done? Mason asked in the video. It is done, Tyler replied, looking up with a smirk. The house is sold. Funds are pending. And the old man? Mason asked. Tyler laughed, a sound that echoed cruelly in the silent courtroom. Out cold. The surgeon said he is under for another 4 hours. By the time he wakes up, the deed will be recorded. We will ship him to Yakima on Tuesday. He won't even know what hit him. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a mask shattering. I looked at the gallery. Megan had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Not because she was disgusted by the morality of it, but because she knew they had been caught. Sienna was looking at Tyler with pure hatred, realizing that her getaway plan was now public record. Judge Harrington slowly took off her glasses. She looked at Mason and Tyler with an expression of pure revulsion. I have sat on this bench for 20 years, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I have seen divorces, custody battles, and petty disputes. But I have never seen such a callous, calculated display of greed from children toward a parent. Mason tried to stand up. Your Honor, please, that video was taken out of context. We were just joking. It was stress relief. Sit down, the judge roared, slamming her gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. You will sit down and you will be quiet. She turned to Dr. Chen. Doctor, can you confirm that the signature on the power of attorney document used to sell the house was obtained while the patient was medicated? I can confirm that Mr. Ross was administered a heavy sedative at 8 in the morning, Dr. Chen replied. Any document signed after that time would be legally void due to lack of capacity. The timestamp on that video is 10:30. The judge turned her gaze to Derek Vance. The lawyer was sweating now, pacing nervously behind his clients. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice icy, "did you know your clients were using a voided power of attorney to conduct real estate transactions?" I was not aware of the medical timeline." "Your Honor," Vance stammered, throwing his hands up, "I acted on the information provided by my clients. I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately." He grabbed his briefcase and stepped away from the table, leaving Mason and Tyler isolated on an island of their own guilt. Judge Harrington turned back to me. Her expression softened just for a moment. "Mr. Ross, I am dismissing the petition for guardianship with prejudice. You are clearly a competent, intelligent man who has been the victim of a conspiracy, but I am not stopping there." She looked at the bailiff. "Take these two into custody," she ordered, pointing at Mason and Tyler. Panic erupted at the defendant's table. "What?" Mason screamed. "You can't arrest us. This is civil court." "It was civil court," the judge replied, her voice hard as steel. "But you have just provided evidence of fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. And based on the flight risk discussed in your wife's emails, which Mr. Ross submitted earlier, bail is denied." Two officers moved in. I watched as they pulled Mason's hands behind his back. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs. It was the same sound as the lock on my front door, the door they had sold. Tyler began to weep, loud, ugly sobs. "Dad, please tell them to stop. We are your sons. We made a mistake. Please, Dad." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the mercy I had shown them their entire lives. He wanted me to be the father who fixed things, the father who wrote the check, the father who forgave. I stood there watching them being dragged away. I thought about the house in Queen Anne. I thought about the fake gold in the basement. I thought about the nursing home in Yakima. I walked up to the railing as they passed. I looked Tyler in the eye. "You are right," I said softly, so only he could hear. "You are my sons, and that is why I have to teach you the hardest lesson of all. Actions have consequences." Mason looked at me with venom in his eyes. "I hate you," he spat. "I know," I replied calmly, "but at least now you won't be able to sell me." The heavy doors swung shut behind them, cutting off their protests. The courtroom was quiet again. I looked at Dr. Chen, who gave me a solemn nod. I looked at the judge, who was writing furiously on her docket. "Mr. Ross," the judge said without looking up, "the court orders the immediate freezing of all assets held by Mason and Tyler Ross to facilitate restitution. We will begin the process of unwinding the sale of your home immediately. You are free to go." I walked out of the courtroom into the bright hallway. The air felt cleaner. The weight on my chest, the one that had been there since I woke up in the hospital, was finally gone. I was not just a survivor anymore. I was a victor. But the war wasn't completely over. I still had a house to reclaim, and two daughters-in-law who needed to learn that being an accessory to a crime carries its own price. I checked my phone. There was a message from Victor. "The coffee is on," it read, "and the locks have been changed. Come home." I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly where I was going, and I knew exactly who I was. I was Benedict Ross, and I had just engineered my own justice. The sound of a gavel striking wood is final, but the sound of a key turning in a lock that belongs to you again is a symphony. 2 days after the court hearing, I stood on the porch of my home in Queen Anne. The real estate sign that had been planted in my front lawn, like a flag of conquest, was gone. I had pulled it out of the ground myself and thrown it into the back of a truck. The house was mine again. The deed had been restored, and the fraudulent sale was unwound, with a speed that only a court order backed by a criminal investigation can achieve. I stepped inside. The house was still empty, stripped of the furniture, and memories that Mason and Tyler had sold off in their rush for cash. But the bones of the house were still there. The oak floors I had sanded were still solid beneath my feet. The bay window where Martha used to watch the rain was still framing the gray Seattle sky. It was hollow, but it was no longer violated. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the walls, feeling the vibrations of the past 40 years. I was not just reclaiming a piece of property. I was reclaiming my history. But while I was putting my house back together, my sons' lives were being dismantled piece by piece. The judge had been ruthless. Because the sale of the house was fraudulent, Mason and Tyler were personally liable for the restitution. They had spent nearly $100,000 in 10 days. They had burned through it on deposits, leases, designer clothes, and that ridiculous Tesla. Now the bill was due, and they were bankrupt. I went to the downtown impound lot the next day, not to bail them out, but to sign the paperwork authorizing the seizure of assets. I watched from the office window as a tow truck dragged Tyler's leased Tesla Model S onto the flatbed. It was a beautiful car, a symbol of the status he so desperately wanted. But as the chains tightened around the wheels, I didn't see a luxury vehicle. I saw my retirement savings twisted into metal and glass. Tyler was there, standing by the fence. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to court, but now it was wrinkled and stained. He looked at the car, then he looked at me. "Dad," he pleaded through the chain-link fence. "I can fix this. I just need a loan. If I can just pay the lease break fee, I can keep the apartment. I can get a job." I walked over to the fence. I looked at him with a calmness that scared him more than my anger ever could. "You do not have an apartment, Tyler," I said. "The landlord evicted you this morning. The deposit was paid with stolen funds, so it has been forfeited to the court. You are homeless." Tyler gripped the fence, his fingers shaking. "But where am I supposed to go? Sienna won't answer my calls." I looked at him, and I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it instantly. I remembered the invoice on my hospital bed. I remembered the laughter in the waiting room. "You are 32 years old," I said. "You are a man. Figure it out." The financial ruin was absolute, but the emotional destruction was the final blow. It happened in the lobby of the courthouse right after the arraignment hearing, where the district attorney formally charged both Mason and Tyler with first-degree fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. They had been released on their own recognizance pending trial only because they had surrendered their passports and had zero assets left to use for flight. They walked out of the courtroom looking for their wives, looking for a ride, looking for any shred of support. Instead, they found Megan and Sienna standing by the security checkpoint holding manila envelopes. Mason saw Megan first. He ran toward her, his face lighting up with a desperate hope. "Megan, thank God. You have the car right. We need to go. I can't be seen here. The press is outside." Megan did not move. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, standing with a posture that was rigid and cold. She didn't open her arms. She simply extended her hand and pressed the envelope against Mason's chest. "What is this?" Mason asked, looking down at the paperwork. "It is a divorce petition," Megan said, her voice flat, "and a restraining order. Do not come back to the condo, Mason. I had the locks changed an hour ago." Mason stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Megan, you can't be serious. We are a team. You said we were in this together. I was in it with a winner. Mason." Megan replied, lifting her sunglasses to reveal eyes that held zero affection. "I did not sign up to be the wife of a felon. I did not sign up to visit you in prison. You are broke. You are facing 5 to 10 years. You are nothing to me now." She turned on her heel, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor echoing the finality of her words. Mason tried to follow her, grabbing her arm. "Megan, wait!" 2 courthouse deputies stepped forward, immediately blocking his path. "Step back, sir," one of them warned. Mason slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his hands and wept. A few feet away, the scene repeated itself with Tyler and Sienna. Sienna was even more brutal. She didn't even hand him the papers. She threw them at his feet. "You lost my money, Tyler," she hissed. "You told me you were smart. You told me you had a plan. You are a loser just like your brother. My lawyer will be in touch." "Sienna, wait," Tyler cried, reaching out. "I still have some crypto in a cold wallet. I can get it for you." Sienna laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. "The feds seized your hard drives, Tyler. You have nothing. Goodbye." She walked away, joining Megan at the exit. The two women who had plotted to spend my money together were now leaving together, united only by their survival instinct. They didn't look back. They stepped out into the rain, leaving their husbands broken and alone on the cold floor of the lobby. I watched it all from the mezzanine level. I stood next to Victor, who had insisted on coming to see the end of the show. "It is a clean sweep," Victor murmured. "House recovered, assets seized, parasites removed." I looked down at my sons. They were sitting 10 feet apart, but they weren't looking at each other. They were isolated in their own misery. They had lost their home, their money, their wives, and their freedom. And they had done it all to themselves. I walked down the stairs slowly. As I reached the lobby floor, Mason looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and begging. "Are you happy now, Dad?" Mason rasped. "You took everything." I stopped and looked him in the eye. "I didn't take anything, Mason. I just took back what was mine. You had a good life. You had an education. You had a father who loved you. You traded it all for a shortcut." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card. It was the business card for a public defender. I dropped it on the floor next to him. "You are going to need this," I said, "because I am not paying for your lawyer." I walked past them toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open and the fresh air of Seattle hit my face. It smelled of rain and pine and freedom. My car was waiting at the curb. Not an ambulance taking me to a nursing home, but a town car taking me back to my life. I got in and looked out the window one last time. I saw Mason and Tyler standing up slowly, gathering their divorce papers from the floor. They looked small. They looked defeated. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix it for them. I had fixed the leak in the roof. I had repaired the foundation. Now it was up to them to survive the storm they had created. "Driver, take me to Medina," I said. "I have a foundation to start." As the car pulled away, I closed my eyes. The nightmare was over. The surgery on my heart had been a success, but the surgery on my life had been a masterpiece. I was 70 years old, and I was just getting started. The house in Queen Anne was empty, but my future was full. And I intended to fill it with people who knew the value of loyalty, not just the price of gold. It has been 6 months since the gavel fell in that courtroom, and the silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Standing on the porch of the Queen Anne house today, the air smells different. It smells of wet earth and blooming hydrangeas the same way it did when Martha was alive. The house has been restored. Every scratch on the floor has been buffed out, and the walls have been repainted in the soft cream color she loved. To an outsider, it looks like the perfect home for a retired man to live out his golden years. But as I walked through the empty rooms this morning, running my hand along the banister, I realized something profound. A house is not a home without trust. The ghosts in these hallways were not of the dead, but of the living. Every corner held a memory of Mason and Tyler running as children. But those memories were now tainted by the image of them standing in this very spot, calculating how much my life was worth. I walked to the bay window and looked out at the street. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was not a buyer. It was Victor Chen. He was walking with a cane, now his wheelchair left behind in the garage of the estate. He moved with a new vigor, a man who had reclaimed his own agency. He walked up the path and joined me on the porch, looking out at the skyline. "It is a beautiful house," Ben Victor said quietly. "You did a magnificent job restoring it. When do you move in?" "You move?" I shook my head slowly. "I am not moving in, Victor. I cannot sleep here. The walls talk too much. And quite frankly, I have realized that my home is no longer a physical structure. It is a state of mind." Victor looked at me, his eyes twinkling with that sharp intelligence I had come to rely on. "So what happens to the asset? Do we sell it?" "No," I said firmly. "We do not sell it. We repurpose it." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded set of blueprints. I handed them to Victor. He opened them, smoothing the paper against the porch railing. He read the title block, and a slow smile spread across his face. "The Dignity for Seniors Foundation." Victor read aloud. "Headquarters. My sons tried to turn this house into cash," I explained. "They tried to erase my history to fund their greed. So I am going to turn this house into a fortress for everyone else who has been erased. This will not be a residence. It will be a center for legal advocacy. We will fill these rooms with lawyers and social workers. We will help the elderly protect their assets. We will fight guardianship fraud. We will make sure that no other father has to wake up from surgery to find out he has been discarded." Victor nodded, folding the plans. "I like it. I like it very much. I will match your initial funding. In fact, I will double it. But on one condition." "Name it," I said. "You continue to live at the estate," Victor said. "The guest wing is too quiet without you. And frankly, I need someone to help me spend my money on things that actually matter." I smiled. It was the first time in years I felt a genuine sense of belonging. I accepted his offer. I had found a brother not by blood, but by the fire of shared adversity. We left the house an hour later. I locked the front door, but this time I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt a sense of mission. A contractor was arriving the next day to install the brass plaque by the door. It would not say Ross Residence. It would say the Dignity Center. As we drove back to Medina, I checked my phone. There was an email from the Department of Corrections. It was a mandatory update. Mason and Tyler had been processed. They were serving their sentences in a minimum security facility in Spokane. They were working in the laundry unit, earning 12 cents an hour. The email mentioned that they had requested visitation. I deleted the email without opening the attachment. I did not hate them anymore. Hate takes energy. Hate requires an emotional investment that I was no longer willing to make. I felt an indifference that was cold and clean. They were adults who had made their choices. They were learning the lesson I had promised them. They were building their own lives now, starting from zero, just like I had when I was their age. Perhaps in 5 or 10 years, when they had paid their debt to society, and to me, we could have a conversation. But not today. Today was for the living. That evening, Dr. Leo Chen joined us for dinner at the estate. We sat on the terrace overlooking Lake Washington, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple. We did not talk about court cases or betrayals. We talked about the future. We talked about the first 3 cases the foundation was going to take on. There was a widow in Bellevue whose daughter was trying to declare her incompetent. There was a retired veteran whose nephew had drained his pension. We were going to help them all. I looked at Victor and Leo raising a glass of wine. "To family," I said. "To family," Leo echoed, clinking his glass against mine. I took a sip and felt the warmth spread through my chest. My heart scar was still there, a thin pink line down my sternum. It would always be there, a reminder of how fragile life is. But the heart beneath it was strong. It was beating with a purpose. I had lost the family I was born with, the family I had raised. But I had found a family that I chose, a family based on respect, a family that looked at me and saw a man, not a bank account. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in twilight. I thought about the gold bars in the basement, the ones that had started the war. They were just metal. They were heavy and cold and useless. The real gold was sitting right here at this table. The real wealth was the freedom to wake up in the morning without fear. I am Benedict Ross. I am 70 years old. I survived a heart attack. I survived my children. And I am happier than I have ever been. My story started with a betrayal, but it ends with a legacy. And the best part is I am just getting started. This story taught me a lesson that took me a lifetime to understand. But I want to share it with you now, so you do not have to learn it the hard way. We are conditioned to believe that family is everything, that blood is a bond that can never be broken. But the truth is that blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. Respect is earned. You do not owe your life or your dignity to anyone simply because they share your DNA. If the people who are supposed to love you are the ones holding the knife, you have every right to walk away. You have every right to protect yourself. True family are the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer them but your company. Do not be afraid to prune the dead branches from your family tree so that you can finally grow. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your family? Tell me your story in the comments below, because your experience might be the lifeline that someone else needs to read today. Stay strong and remember, you are the architect of your own peace. See you in the next video.